Thanks, ladies and gents. This is our third and final speaker for this session. I think Robin is pretty well known to a lot of people. Robin Droogleever. He's now going to give us a presentation, which hopefully will pop up soon, on the first New South Wales mounted rifles in the Boer War of 1899 to 1902. For those who don't know, Robin is the president of the Anglo-Boer War Study Group of Australasia. He has also produced many publications, including one which I have a particular interest in, which is the book that he wrote on the 5th VMR. I had a great uncle of mine served in the 5th VMR, and Robin, I know, has done a lot of research, particularly on the 5th, but also a lot of others within the Boer War in particular. And I was very interested to know that the 5th VMR Memorial, which was originally located right out the front of Vic Barracks, Melbourne, I think it's a sign to show their strength to the authorities after Wilman's Rust, was relocated in 1967 because of the widening of St Kilda Road. So that's all detailed in Robin's book, which is up at the back there for sale if you're interested. So with that, I would like to introduce Robin to speak on the New South Wales and the Boer War. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Murray. We'll get straight into this, 35 minutes. I've tested myself a couple of times and drifted as much as 40 minutes, so I must get a move on. This particular squadron, the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles, yes, I think you'll be very proud of this particular unit. It was, although a New South Wales unit, there were quite a number of Victorians serving in it. But I think that its achievements are the sort of achievements that all Australians would be very, very proud of. Well, let's move on. Yep. On the 3rd of November 1899, New South Wales sent 125 men of an infantry company and 83 men of a mounted rifles company to the war in South Africa. It was intended that the horses for the mounted men and a further 26 men who would look after the horses would come by another transport a week later. In February, these two companies would be reinforced by 3 further companies, and there would also be additions to the mounted rifles company. All these reinforcements would be mounted men. The companies would later become squadrons, redesignated as such, and then you have now the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles Regiment. Most of Sydney seemed to have come out to farewell the troops despite the showers. The far picture is George Street near the post office on the 3rd of November 1899. It would take a month to sail to South Africa. The photo on the right shows the last farewells from the steamship Aberdeen. Clearly a momentous occasion. We move to the situation in South Africa at this time. Our interest is on the fighting on what was called the Western Front, where by the time the Aberdeen arrived in early December there was stalemate. The Boers had had success at Modder River and Marcusfontein and laid siege to the diamond city of Kimberley. General Cronje, the Boer commander, had settled in at Marcusfontein, blocking off access to Kimberley. The New South Wales men arrived at Cape Town on the 6th of December 1899. The war had already been going for nearly 2 months. The New South Wales infantry was sent to Enslin to join a composite Australian regiment. The New South Wales Mounted Rifles remained in Cape Town to await their horses, which arrived on the 19th of December. The Mounted Rifles were then sent to DR and then Prieska. Now, if you bottom left-hand corner, you'll see Hopetown. Prieska was 90 miles west of Hopetown. where there was in fact a report of a Boer threat from an open territory known as Griqualand to the west. In the new year, things began to happen. The arrival of a new Commander-in-Chief, and with it a new strategy. Lord Roberts and Kitchener, his Chief of Staff. They arrived in Cape Town on the 10th of January 1900. Roberts had already formulated a plan, some say it was as late as while he was on the ship, to deal with the Boers. His first priority was the Western Front. Foremost in Roberts's planning was the creation of Imperial Mounted Infantry regiments and greater independence for the cavalry. These to counter the Boer mobility which had caused such difficulties for the army up to this time. He intended to use the mounted infantry and the cavalry in an offensive role, mainly in flank attacks, without working with the infantry, which would later secure the position taken. But he had considerable difficulty finding 8,000 horsemen among the British infantry regiments. And as you can see there, it was rather an amusing occasion. He had to deal with training and equipping such a force. That certainly was a problem. The Australian infantry were among those selected to be horsed. Most of the infantrymen serving with the Australian regiment at Enslin were competent horsemen, but the non-riders were trained to ride on mules, for there were simply no horses available. This was achieved by the end of January 1900. They were then sent to a horse depot to collect the mounts and equipment. Roberts's plans were complicated by the recent Boer invasion of the Eastern Cape Colony, to be called the Central Front. This is it on the map in front of you. Fortunately, numbers were small. The British forces under General John French were able to hold them at present. However, in February, both French and his cavalry were taken by Roberts to be used for the relief of Kimberley. The Australian Regiment, one of the many new mounted infantry units, was sent to the Central Front to replace French's cavalry. General Clements replaced French as commanding officer on the Central Front with his headquarters at Rensburg. Clements had 5,275 men. The Boers, under General Hendrik Schoeman, had 4,800. The New South Wales men were quartered at 2 camps to the south of Colesberg. Roberts aimed to relieve Kimberley by a mounted assault which would bypass Cronje's main force at Marcusfontein. This was achieved on the 15th of February by French's cavalry, but without the mounted infantry. The mounted infantry were delayed, so French simply wouldn't wait for them. The New South Wales Mounted Rifles had been placed with Colonel Hannay's Mounted Infantry Corps. Cronje, feeling threatened now from the rear, moved from Marcusfontein. Roberts ordered French to work with the mounted infantry to harass Cronje from his rear, while Roberts threatened his front. This was done, and Cronje, making his way back to Bloemfontein, sought protection in the bed of the Modder River at Paardeberg Drift, where he dug in. Cronje and his army were trapped in the riverbed at Paardeberg and finally surrendered on the 27th of February 1900 after prolonged British artillery fire over 10 days. Over 3,000 prisoners were taken. We return to the Central Front, where the New South Wales infantry, now mounted, have their first casualties. Clements sent patrols out to probe for Boer weaknesses, and on the 20th of February at Berkshire Hill, a skirmish with Boers that threatened the position led to the death of 23-year-old Sam Aitchison of Shell Harbour, who was to die of wounds from shrapnel fired by Boer artillery. One other man was wounded. 6 days later, in a skirmish near Plattsburgh, there were 4 more casualties, 2 dead, 2 wounded. Fraser and McLennan died from their wounds. Fraser was 32 years old, and McLennan a month short of his 19th birthday. Reinforcements arrived for the British on the Central Front. and Clements was able to go on the offensive. News of Cronje's surrender at Paardeberg cheered everybody up. He took Colesberg, then he moved to the border at Norval's Pont, where the Boers had destroyed the railway and road bridge across the Orange River. He had to wait while the engineers built a pontoon bridge across the river, which they completed within 72 hours. We could learn something there about Westgate Bridge, couldn't we? In the meantime, on the 17th of February, reinforcements in the form of the 3 companies of New South Wales Mounted Infantry arrived in Cape Town to join their colleagues. This would bring the numbers up to 5 companies, which would constitute a regiment. In command of these reinforcements was 34-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Guy Knight. The reinforcements arrived in time to be utilised for the escorting of Boer prisoners taken at Paardeberg, and now having to be taken to Modder River Station to be sent to Cape Town. They were then ordered to join Colonel Le Galle's mounted column at Osfontein, 6 miles to the east of Paardeberg. Knight's 3 new companies were designated B, C and D squadrons, the mounted rifles already in the country being labelled the A squadron. Within 2 weeks, Knight's men were in action. After delivering Boer prisoners to Modder River Station, the 3 new squadrons of New South Wales Mounted Infantry began the return ride to join Le Galle. Some 6 miles before reaching Le Galle, Knight had to fight a battle at Brunt Valley on the 6th of March, and he had 7 casualties, all wounded. It was an unusual battlefield, simply because the men got protection from Boer rifle fire by lying behind giant anthills. The next day, they joined Le Galle, who also had the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, that's A Squadron, as part of his column. 4 of the 5 squadrons were now together. Roberts continued the advance. By 10th of March, the Boers had set up a defence line on a range of hills which spanned 3 farms, Abrams Kraal, Dam Valley and Bosrand. Driefontein Farm, adjacent to Bosrand, was where Lord Roberts set up his headquarters. Abrams Kraal was where the Boer commander Christian de Wet had his headquarters. On the 10th of March 1900, Le Galle's men attacked the Boer position at Bosrand. British infantry finally forced the Boer withdrawal. It had been a punishing affair, and there were 5 casualties among the New South Wales boys. 1 officer, Captain Alfred Bennett, and 4 privates. Only 1 was killed. Ironically, his name was Abrams. Private Willie Abrahams of Bega was just a week off his 21st birthday when he was shot in the heart. After what had been a grueling ride for his mounted men, 3 days later Roberts entered Bloemfontein, the capital of the Orange Free State. He believed that the Boers were ready for peace and offered an amnesty to all burghers who put down their arms and took an oath of allegiance. The army was to spend 7 weeks in Bloemfontein, from the 13th of March to the 1st of May 1900, while Roberts waited in vain for the Free State leaders to surrender. While waiting for the surrender, Roberts prepared for the next stage of the Grand March to Pretoria, the capital of the Transvaal. Supplies came in slowly. 2 trainloads of every 6 brought in each day were consumed by the army in Bloemfontein. When an epidemic of enteric fever struck the army camps, Roberts was slow to prioritise medical supplies, and conditions worsened. When the advance took its first step in late April, 4,500 men were in hospital. 13 men of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles died from disease, largely enteritis and dysentery, during this 7-week period. A high price to pay for rest and recreation. While in Bloemfontein, Roberts had a grand vision for the Mounted Rifles and the newly formed Mounted Infantry units. A Mounted Infantry division of some 11,200 men split into 2 brigades. each led by Generals Edward Hutton and Charles Ridley, and under the overall command of Lieutenant General Ian Hamilton, was created on the 7th of April. There would be 4 corps within each brigade. Hutton had all the Australians and New Zealanders and Canadians. Ridley had the South African colonials. There'd be an Imperial Mounted Infantry Regiment within each corps. The New South Wales Mounted Rifles Company, companies, now squadrons of course, were all placed into the 2nd Corps, led by Lieutenant Colonel Henry Delisle. The infantry company, which had been with Clemence's central column, now joined the other 4 companies as E Squadron. In the 2nd Corps with the New South Wales Mounted Rifles were the Western Australians under Major Hatherley Moore, and the 6th Imperial Mounted Infantry, comprising companies from 5 infantry regiments. Despite the setbacks, the Boers decided to continue the struggle. Their new strategy would be aimed at wearing down the British will to continue the war by brief confrontation and delaying tactics. Direct and sustained battle would be avoided. De Gallet, with his force, including the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, shortly before they were transferred to Delisle's command, moved to a fresh camp at Spatefontein, about 22 miles to the east of Bloemfontein, on the 31st of March. Among his responsibilities would be to protect the most advanced post at Career Siding from any attack from the east. Life was one of constant patrols and the limited number of fit horses, and there were frequent skirmishes with Boer patrols and scouting parties. One such patrol on the 11th of April resulted in Alfred Dufresne of C Squadron being nominated for the award of the Queen's Scarf for courage, for saving a colleague who had been unmounted during a brief skirmish. The scarf, as you know, can be seen in the Australian War Memorial today. Now, as part of this proposed plan of advance into the Transvaal, Roberts provided 2 large flanking bodies to his main column, which would advance along the railway line. On the left would be General French and his cavalry brigade, supported by General Hutton and his mounted infantry. On the right would be General Ian Hamilton with a strong mounted force of both cavalry and mounted infantry, as well as infantry divisions. Approximately 30% of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, mainly E Squadron, would be utilised by Hamilton because they had the fittest horses. The remainder of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, which was waiting for remounts, would leave with Roberts's main army on the 1st of May. Prior to the departure of the main army, Hamilton's force was sent out by Roberts on the 22nd of April to clear the area as far as Tabanchu. This it did, including taking control of the waterworks once more. Roberts believed that he had the right flank secure. The army got underway on the 1st of May. The New South Wales Mounted Rifles were split between 2 different commanders. Those in Hamilton's column served in Delisle's 2nd Mounted Infantry Corps. Those members of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles not with Ian Hamilton were ordered to join Colonel Pilcher's 3rd Mounted Infantry Corps, which was working with Hutton and French on the left flank. They were going to see a great deal of action. They were taking a Bruntfort on the 3rd of May, then on the 5th of May, they were used in an all-out assault on the Boer positions across the Vet River at Coetzee's Drift. At the Vet River, 3 men of C Squadron, bless them, captured a Boer Maxim. Both Roberts and Hutton congratulated the New South Wales Mounted Rifles on their actions that day. The Boers withdrew to the next defensive position at the Zant River. Now, whereas the New South Wales Mounted Rifles under Knight, serving with Hutton, had performed with distinction at the Vet River, it was to be the New South Wales Mounted Rifles with Delisle, under Hamilton, who were to play a significant role at the Zant River, or to be exact, hastening the Boer withdrawal from the Zant River. Both the cavalry and the mounted infantry, which included the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, took most of the prisoners that the Boers lost in the battle. There were only 2 New South Wales men wounded. The 5 squadrons of the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles came together at last when the Army occupied Kroonstad on the 15th of May. They were placed under Hamilton's command rather than Hutton's. Here the Army rested and waited for supplies. The Transvaalers retired northwest for the border, the River Vaal, while the Free Staters went northeast. Hamilton was directed to chase after the Free Staters and French the Transvaalers. On the 25th of May, the border of the Vaal River, was crossed by Roberts at Viljoensdrift with maximum publicity. The next objective was Johannesburg. The Boers had dug in along the Klip River to the south of the city. Roberts used enveloping flanks again to dislodge them. The fall of Johannesburg was a triumph for the New South Wales Mounted Rifles. Hamilton's mounted men worked with Robert Broadwood's 2nd Cavalry Brigade and cooperated with French on the British left. French was keen to swing wide around the heavily fortified Boer right at Doornkop, but Hamilton believed that with a bit of probing he could find a weakness in the Boer defence. He was right. New South Wales patrols found it at Florida. Delisle prevailed upon a reluctant Broadwood, who would not allow his cavalry to venture on what was such a dangerous task, to let the mounted infantry make a frontal attack at that point. It was successful. Officially, French was given the honour of breaking the Boer defence. It was Delisle's 2nd New South Wales Mounted Rifles that did it. The Boers, in some disarray, but mindful of the need to defend their capital, Pretoria, retired to a defensive line along the 6-mile Spruit, south of the city. Delisle, emboldened by his success at Florida, with his mounted infantry on the British left, searched for a weak spot in the Boer line and got Hamilton's approval to exploit it. He broke through, leaving the Boers behind him and entering the outer boundaries of the town. He sent Lieutenant William Watson of D Squadron into the city with a flag of truce. Watson surprisingly met the Boer Commandant Louis Botha and secured the surrender of the city. It had been a memorable occasion for the colonials from New South Wales. The incredible success of Delisle's 2nd Mounted Infantry Corps, and in particular the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, was to continue at Diamond Hill on the 11th and 12th of June 1900. The Battle of Diamond Hill, 15 miles from Pretoria, was inconclusive if one accepts the Boer withdrawal from the battlefield as a strategic one. Boer Commandant Louis Botha claimed that despite the premature retirement forced upon him, he secured the safety of his President Kruger in his flight east. Boer defence on this occasion rested upon a 25-mile line from the Camillefontaine Valley in the north, across the railway line, then south to the Tigerspoort Bridges. Botha only had some 8,000 men who had come to fight. Roberts had 20,000. Botha made sure his flanks were well protected with strong detachments. Despite heavy fighting, the 11th of June resulted in a stalemate. The Boer line held, but things were certainly to change on the 12th of June. Breakthrough of the Boer defences was to happen on Roberts's right, where Hamilton's column faced the Boer left wing at Renosterfontein and Morse Kop. Roberts ordered the Guards brigades to attack the centre and began a remorseless artillery bombardment of the Boer defences. It could be seen that men were being moved from the heavily fortified flanks to the centre, and Hamilton noted this. For the moment, Boer artillery and riflemen held up the advance of the infantry. Hamilton, purportedly on the recommendation of Winston Churchill, an observer of the battle, decided to act and send in his mounted men at the summit of Diamond Hill. It was a risky ride, but the move was successful, and the Boer left was turned. Botha quickly called in his troops, and the Boers retired. Roberts returned to Pretoria with his army, which needed rest and re-equipping. Diamond Hill was a costly battle. for the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, but one in which they gained considerable honour. Two officers were killed, 31-year-old Percy Drage of D Squadron, 23-year-old William Harriott of C Squadron. There were 6 men wounded. One officer, 37-year-old William Holmes, 57-year-old Warrant Officer Fred Liggins, note his age, both of E Squadron. The remainder were all privates. This map shows the occupation of territory by Boers and British in the republics round about this time, the 12th of June 1900, and as you can see there were vast swathes of territory still under Boer control in the two republics. The New South Wales boys rested in Pretoria for a brief while after Diamond Hill before being sent south to the town of Springs. In the Free State, there had been a Boer uprising in June which required Roberts to send much needed troops from the Transvaal to deal with the problem. This was the start of the guerrilla war. Free State Boer General Christian de Wet's successes against British garrisons along the Free State Railway threatened the line of communication with the Transvaal. De Lisle's 2nd Mounted Infantry Corps was one of those units sent from Springs to Heidelberg to join Ian Hamilton, who had been sent by Roberts as one of 4 column commanders to deal with the Free State insurgency. At this time there were more casualties from riding accidents than from conflict with the Boers. Among those casualties was Ian Hamilton, who broke his collarbone. He was replaced by Sir Archibald Hunter. General Hunter's ruthless policy against Boer civilians was not to de Lisle's liking. Hunter believed that he had to discourage Boer civilians from providing succour to the Boer commandos, and that the most effective way was to destroy possible places of refuge like the farmhouse of any man known to be on commando. De Lisle and his Australians were most uncomfortable with this order, but they did as they were told, reluctantly. On the 19th of July 1900, the New South Wales Mounted Rifles were engaged in 2 fights on one day. C Squadron was detailed to act as an escort to a convoy going to Kroonstad and was attacked in the morning at Paardenplatz, 7 miles south of Lindley. The Boers were beaten off, the convoy was saved. There were no casualties among the New South Wales Mounted Rifles. In the afternoon, the rest of the regiment, acting as rearguard to Broadwood's cavalry force, was attacked by another Boer force under Commandant Donnie Turon at Palmeetfontein, 20 miles south of Lindley. This force knew nothing about the morning attack. The casualties among the New South Wales boys were 3 killed and 2 wounded. Included in those killed was the commander of the Western Australians, Major Hatherley Moore. Then good news. At the Bradwater Basin in the Eastern Free State on the 30th of July, Roberts's pressure on the Free State insurgency appeared to have ended when Boer General Prinsloo surrendered with 4,000 Free Staters. But the Free State military mastermind, General Christian de Wet, had escaped with 2,000 men, and every effort was now made to catch him. De Wet retreated to the area of Renosterpoort, immediately south of the Vaal. The news soon reached Lord Roberts, who allowed Lord Kitchener to take command of a column to deter de Wet from entering the Transvaal. The major drifts were all being watched. Some were occupied. Kitchener gathered a force of some 11,000 men, among them de Lisle's 2nd Mounted Infantry Corps, and arranged them in a semicircle around de Wet in Free State territory. Kitchener treated the Vaal like it were a solid wall. On the 6th of August, de Wet crossed at Schoemansdrift and evaded British forces, which managed a brief skirmish with de Wet's rearguard, but then lost contact. The first de Wet hunt was on. As soon as de Wet had entered the Transvaal, Kitchener followed. De Wet was chased north, but was able to escape through Oliphant's Neck and make his way back to the Free State. He spent only 2 weeks in the Transvaal. During that time, he was assisted by a number of local Transvaal commandants. It was against one of these that the New South Wales Mounted Rifles bumped at Welverdiend on the 14th of August. And it was here that Colonel de Lisle was wounded in the left arm in a skirmish that barely lasted half an hour. Having heard that De Wet was now on his way back to the Free State, Kitchener took his column to relieve the besieged garrison at Eland's River Post. De Wet had indeed abandoned his Transvaal allies and on his way back to the Free State, dropped in on the town of Potchefstroom, where he was welcomed by the citizens. De Wet is third from the right in the photo. And he picked up a stock of dynamite which he took back with him. He was much impressed by the story of how Potchefstroom burghers restored to working order a pile of over 200 Mausers burnt by the British when they visited the town in June. All the Boers needed to do was to manufacture wooden hand butts to fit and then clean them. He proudly sat with a reconstructed Mauser in this posed photo below. Despite being sent back to Pretoria for rest and refit, in early September, the fit riders of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles found themselves operating in the Witwatersburg and Gatsrand against Boer groups that Roberts considered a threat to Pretoria, but they had little success in catching these elusive groups. They were called back to Pretoria on the 16th of September, for Colonel Henry de Lisle was now fit again and had been given command of his own column, and he was permitted to have his 2nd Mounted Infantry Corps as the base unit. He was given an additional fresh unit as well, Kitchener's Horse, mostly fresh recruits which were to give de Lisle many headaches. Oh, thank you. De Lisle's 2nd Mounted Infantry moved into the Free State and operated in the rural districts south of the Vaal. Boer farms were targeted and the inhabitants cleared out, and the farms and livestock were destroyed. The men loathed this work but carried out orders. Counterinsurgency against guerrillas continued. On the 1st of October, de Lisle's men were at Eland's Kop, some 7 miles northeast of Heilbronn, when they clashed with a commando led by Frederick Hatting of Senekal, which confirmed that the Boers still had a great deal of sting. 2 men were killed, both from E Squadron, both 19-year-olds, Belton Halley and David Willis. De Wet needed supplies. He attempted to seize a convoy at Frederickstad in the Transvaal just across the border, but was bravely beaten off by the escort and returned to the Free State. British columns, including de Lisle's under General Charles Knox, converged on the drifts over the Vaal. De Wet crossed at a little-known drift called Rensburg Drift. It was a hazardous undertaking, and as a consequence, one of his 75mm guns lost a wheel and had to be abandoned after its breech block had been removed. Australian scouts on the 27th of October tracked him to the drift, reported that De Wet was on the Free State side of the river in Lager. The New South Wales Mounted Rifles were advance guard on that day. Things moved quickly. The advance guard of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles arrived and discovered the abandoned Krups gun in the undergrowth. They could see the Boer Lager about 2,000 yards away. The main body of de Lisle's mounted infantry was called up and an attack was made on the Lager. It was about noon. De Wet was taken completely by surprise. He had not expected the English to discover the drift. The Boers scattered, losing 2 artillery pieces, abandoning 8 wagons and sustaining 24 casualties. De Wet moved to Bothaville. Knox and Gallet, who were also part of Knox's force, were not far behind him. Once again, De Wet was surprised. On the 5th of November, the Gallet scouts found his lager at the farm of Doornkraal, about 3 miles from Bothaville. Word was sent to Knox, who hastened on all his forces. The next day at dawn, the Gallet attacked and literally caught the Boers napping. There was panic in the lager and many men rode off, but De Wet sent after them and convinced them to return, claiming that only a small British force was opposing them. Boer resistance strengthened. Le Gallet occupied the farmhouse, and it was here he was mortally wounded by a Boer sniper. The noise of battle drew the British reinforcements to the scene, and de Lisle's force arrived first. The timely arrival of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles had prevented the Boers outflanking Le Gallet's men. And when Knox arrived with the rest of the column, the battle was well in favour of the British. De Wet realised that and hastily ordered a retreat, abandoning wagons and artillery pieces and escaping with President Steyn in a covered buggy, leaving state papers and correspondence behind in the rush to get away. The 75mm Krups gun in Kings Park, Perth, was a trophy taken at Bothaville and given to the Western Australian government in 1905. The hunt for De Wet and Steyn was relentless. On the 16th of November 1900, 3 patrols of New South Wales men, Western Australians and Kitchener's Horse were sent out north from Kroonstad in the direction of Renosterkop, some 15 miles away. In command of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles Patrol was Lieutenant William Newman. Boers were known to be around. The men stopped for lunch, and 2 observation posts on the nearby ridge were manned by 2 men each and were about a mile apart. The Boers attacked both, fought off reinforcements sent to help. British casualties were 2 dead and 3 wounded. Charlie Hughes of C Squadron, whose photo is up there, shot through both thighs and the right elbow, was on one of the observation posts. He walked over a mile to a farmhouse to get help for his critically injured mate despite his wounds, and he wasn't even mentioned in dispatches. That evening, after an emotional speech by Delisle thanking A&E squadrons for all the good work they'd done, he wished them bon voyage. They handed in their mounts the next day on the 17th of November, but only managed to get a ship on the 12th of December 1900, so keeping them entertained and disciplined for 3 weeks was a challenge. The war continued for the remaining 3 squadrons of the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles. Delisle's column was reduced to 8 squadrons, and as a consequence he was deemed not to be strong enough to control the area around Renosterkop. The column returned to Kroonstad, where patrols continued. Punitive action against the civilian population intensified. The column was very much under strength. Active numbers of the New South Wales boys were still only about 180 out of 380. Finally, A&E squadrons were able to leave Cape Town. They joined a host of other Australians returning home in the steamship Orient on the 12th of December and entered Sydney Heads on the 8th of January 1901. They missed the Commonwealth celebrations, but there were still reminders of that occasion that had ushered in a federated Australia. Back on the veldt on the 16th of December 1900, the men were preparing to leave on a circular 6-week trek to continue punitive work against the Boer population, when word came in that 2 small Free State commandos under General Pritzker and Herzog had invaded the Cape Colony. They'd split up and gone in different directions. Delisle's column was ordered to pursue Herzog, who had gone in a westerly direction towards Carnarvon. Herzog was accompanied by another Boer leader, George Brand. Delisle was joined by Colonel Alexander Thornycroft's column in the chase after Herzog. Herzog had only 350 men. Only 137 were armed, but everyone carried 11 cartridges. Most of his men had no horse or saddlery. There was a naive belief that Dutch sympathisers would provide all their needs. As it turned out, they had to commandeer most of their needs. Delisle and Thornycroft left Britstown at 4 a.m. One more page. You okay with that? Keep going. Okay, thank you. Delisle and Thornycroft left Britstown at 4 a.m. on the 26th of December and moved in the direction of Prieska. Contact was made later in the day with the Boers on Homan's farm at Bosch Port, where they were in the process of packing up a lager. Led by Colonel Knight, it was a gallop of nearly 8 miles before Knight spotted Boers on a nearby ridge. Here the gallant colonel was shot down, wounded in the chest. The fighting lasted barely an hour before the Boers fled. They left behind 2 killed and 10 wounded and a number of wagons, one of which contained beer for the Boer garrison at Prieska, but was gratefully accepted by the New South Welshmen. Herzog moved quickly, and the British followed hard on his heels. Both sides were slowed down by unmounted men, having to be carried in wagons. This was the arid Karoo. There was no grass, and the fodder carried on the wagons was soon used up. The horses were driven to the point of collapse. By the time they reached Carnarvon in the new year of 1901, it was essential that the animals be rested. The chase after Herzog was an epic endurance ride, most likely for both parties. In some areas there was no habitation for miles. Horses that could no longer continue were simply abandoned. More columns joined in the chase. Conditions got even worse in the mountains. It was bad enough in the Cederberg. But in the moonlight night climb of the Rochefeld Mountains on the right, most likely this was the most arduous and terrifying experience for the men of New South Wales, all to verify a report which did not turn out to be true, that the Boers were on top of the range. At Carnarvon on the 19th of February 1901, Delisle bade farewell to the second contingent of his New South Wales Mounted Rifle troops. At Diar on the 2nd of March, they handed over their mounts and saddlery to the Army Service Corps, were issued with new uniforms and were ready to catch the train for Cape Town. While the New South Wales lads were at Maitland Camp, Delisle continued the campaign, but against Kritzinger. The New South Wales had to wait over 3 weeks for a ship to become available. They became frustrated with the delay. 2 incidents occurred during this time: the death of Richard McGill of Temora, who was killed in a railway accident, and the destruction of the offices of the South African News, a pro-Boer newspaper printed in Cape Town to appease the Cape Dutch, and which had been insulting towards Australians. Finally, on the 31st of March 1901, the New Zealand Shipping Company's boat, the Tongariro, took on board all those Australians and New Zealanders destined for home. It was on its maiden voyage. There were only 131 members of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles on board. 20 had been left behind in Cape Town for a number of reasons, choice being the main one. They reached Sydney on the 30th of April. It was a wet day, but this did not stop the crowds from welcoming them. The 75mm gun captured at Rensburg Drift led the march to the barracks, where the men were dismissed. Most would be receiving an even grander welcome from the citizenry of their hometown. Generous gifts were given out, and the young men treated like kings for the day. Coincidentally, the New South Wales and Victorian naval contingents, returning from the Boxer Rebellion in China, arrived home on this day as well. Thank you.
Wow, what a presentation. A lot of information there, wasn't there? Unbelievable.
Sorry about the timing.
No problems whatsoever, Robert. Hey, look, firstly, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for that detailed information. I have one very quick question, very quick. Fantastic photos, and the black and white images are remarkable, aren't they? They're really clear. Early in the Boer War, were the Australians issued with the British pith helmet, or did they continue to wear their slouch hats?
Ooh. To begin with, they were issued with the pith helmet, particularly the first and second contingents. Craig, you would be able to correct me on this most likely, but I suppose, after February 1900, once the mounted units were established, you saw the use of the felt hat, slouch hat.
Robert, if I can contribute, I was in Colesberg a couple of years ago, mothy little museum, old cork helmet on top of a cupboard. I took it down, turned it over, and there was 19-year-old Simon McLennan's name inside it. He died in the hospital in Colesberg, and this was an Indian-made, woven cork helmet, and his helmet was still on the wardrobe in Colesberg. He was the only son. He had 4 sisters from Paddington. And,
yeah, it's a sad story.
Extraordinary.
It's a story, isn't it?
Yeah, his helmet's still there in the museum.
There you go. Answer the question. Look, we'll wrap this session up. We've travelled from New Zealand to Oakley to South Africa in a very quick flight past. So, Robin, thank you once again for your presentation today. And thank you. And ladies and gents, I think it's now afternoon tea. Thank you.